What if we could open up to love? That seems like a really kind of obvious question because every human being, I believe, wants love, needs love. And yet, the very thing that we want, we are also very good at hiding away from or keeping ourselves at a distance from, because love ultimately is deeply vulnerable. Being human is deeply vulnerable, but we have learned ways of creating coping mechanisms so that we don't get hurt. And love can hurt because it's vulnerable. So I know I've touched upon this before, but I want to go more deeply into this question of what if we opened ourselves up to love? What would that be like? What would we have to let go of? And what would we have to learn to receive in order to really get what we desire in life? Because having done this work with individuals for, 13 years now, I've learned very well how we keep ourselves from love. So let's look at how we can open up to love. This is Corinne Bloom, and you're listening to Raw Conversations. So why am I looking at this topic today? I think this is just a universal topic, and it's something that comes up a lot in my work with individuals. But I've been reading a book called The Complete Enneagram by Beatrice Chestnut. And I first came across the Enneagram in my early mid-20s, and it was so insightful. It was such a helpful tool for me to understand myself, because it was in a period of my life where I was really diving in and diving deep and, learning about myself. And it was, I think I shared in a previous podcast when I was really asking myself the question of who am I without the identity of being a dancer? And I was really just exploring my inner world. That was the traveling that I was doing. I was traveling into my inner world. So the Enneagram was really an amazing tool, and I still find it an incredible tool to work with. And I use it a lot in my practice working with individuals. But reading this book, which offers a slightly different, not a different slant, but just, it's like a different perspective on it, I really notice how with all of the personality types, really what it comes down to is, my belief is every human being wants and needs love. Like that is just an essential. Like we need air and we need water. We need love. And yet we have these brilliant coping mechanisms as to how we don't always receive love because we've been hurt by love, or because, as I shared earlier, that we're so deeply vulnerable as human beings. And I think this is one thing that I will keep on coming back home to and stress it, is that this belief that we aren't or should not be vulnerable is total horseshit. Because to be human is to be vulnerable. And actually, when we really settle into that and recognize that it's not a weakness, but it's something that is so profoundly beautiful about being human, that we can find our power and our sense of self in that place, because it's so honest. Like when we're vulnerable, it's so goddamn honest. And I've noticed that when, if I look at the moments, if I go back to all of my relationships really, or just to people in general, what do I admire the most is when I catch them in a moment of vulnerability, and you can see it in their eyes. It's particularly with a romantic partner, because you bring up all of your stuff and you confront things together and you're so intimate with each other. You can really see in their eyes when there's a moment of vulnerability. And for me, I've always found it something that's profoundly beautiful. I love it. But we have this terrible connotation of vulnerability as weakness, because in a very, kind of type A, over masculinized, but not the divine masculine, as I think I talked about in my last podcast, kind of society, it's like, no, be tough. Toughness is better than vulnerability, and vulnerability is weakness. So I know I've said this before, that we really have to redefine all of these words. because it's robbing us of our humanity. And it's robbing us of peace and happiness, really, because if we're going against our own humanity and we're not accepting our full selves, like, how can we be happy? We can't, because happiness comes from peace, and peace comes from acceptance, the acceptance of our entire selves. So coming back to love, and kind of looking at the Enneagram and our 27 different types, basically, because there's 9 primary types and 3 subtypes of each type. And so, there's a large range, and it's so multi-textured. I can't even go into it right now, but I do recommend, if you're curious, to take a look into it. But we all have these really interesting ways of wanting love, trying to get love, and equally withholding love from ourselves because of fear, of vulnerability, of pain. It's ultimately the fear of pain. And it's so interesting because I'm someone that is very able to go into all emotions and into the shadow and into the pain and sit there and, get to know it really well. I know suffering very well. I've also learned how to not stay in suffering and how to alchemize that and transform that and find beauty. But not like a tragic beauty. I used to be there, but I think now it's really like the beauty of alchemization. And the thing is that pain is just going to be a part of life. Suffering is going to be a part of life, because she gives a story. It's a parable that I really love. And I won't give the whole story, but this is Beatrice Chestnut in the book. And it's a story of the acorn, and how there's all these acorns, and they're all, taking care of themselves and going to like acorn spas and making sure that their acorn, is like really nice and well polished and taken care of, and everything is comfortable. And then this acorn drops into their little society, and it's all kind of roughed up and dirty and all of this stuff. And it's going, you're not the acorn. You're the tree. We're that. Like, look up. We're that. We're the oak tree. We're not the acorn. And, the acorns are like, oh, nonsense. That's ridiculous. We're acorns. And so the whole kind of point of this story is that we're not just our personality. And we're not these shells that we've created around ourselves to protect ourselves. We're not these kind of tiny selves that we sometimes feel safe within. We're actually these immense, beautiful beings that are so much bigger and more powerful and more expansive than we allow ourselves to be. And the thing is that in order to reach who we truly are, the true self. So the Enneagram will say it as the false self and the true self. The personality is kind of our coping mechanisms, and the true self is the essence of who we are, our authentic self, as I would call it. But the process of getting there means we have to crack the shell. Instead of staying in the little acorn and believing we're just acorns, we have to crack the shell and, go down into the darkness of the soil and then grow into the oak trees that we are. And it's such a beautiful example of what I really believe this human experience is all about, which is it's a process of self-discovery. We forget who we are. We have to go through a certain kind of suffering to crack open our shells and rediscover, essentially, remember who we are, and recognize that we are so much bigger than who we've thought we've been. So you throw into it like our childhood experiences and the ways in which we feel like we didn't get the love that we needed, or some kind of need that wasn't met. And I want to point out that even if you go back and go, well, I had a really good childhood, actually. I had great parents, they were both there. Everything was really good. You still got something. Like we all do. Because here's the thing, and I can say this as a parent, it is impossible to give our children, no matter how much we love them, we cannot fulfill 100% of their needs 100% of the time, because we are human ourselves, having this human experience, and being a parent is bloody tiring sometimes. Like, you're going to have your moments where you just can't be fully present, or you've got to take care of your own stuff, or you have to cook, or you have to clean, or you have to, there's just life, right? We're human. And certainly what I've, what's the word that I want to use? Intention for parenting of like what I want to share with my daughter is just how to be human, not how to be perfect, but how to be human. And part of that is messy. And part of it is like, yeah, I'm sorry in this moment, I can't give you what you need, but I'm still like the communication and the self-awareness and the self-responsibility and that open conversation, I think is all we really need to know that we don't have to be alone in an experience or to stay confused in an experience of pain or suffering or loneliness, that there is still even an ounce of presence, even when you feel like you cannot give presence. I found myself saying that to my daughter, like, I'm so tired right now. I'm sorry, I can't really be present for you in the way that I know that you need. And sometimes I can say that eloquently and sometimes I can't. But, again, it's the conversation. So my point in sharing this is that at some point or another, a child will feel like, oh, well, I didn't get all the love that I needed, or I didn't get seen or heard or understood or valued or have the protection and safety that I needed. Or, again, when you go into the Enneagram, it's quite interesting to see which type you land in. And you're like, oh, yeah, right, that's familiar. There's something that we get, triggered or hurt by, or the wound comes in, which again, I think our wound is to show us our humanity. And through getting to know our humanity and ultimately accepting all of our humanity, which means the shadow, we remember our divinity again. And that's a beautiful arc of life and alchemization. So no matter how good your childhood was, there's still something, right? Because we can't have 100% of our needs met. And ultimately, it's really about when we grow old enough to be able to do this internal work, the inner work, and go into our innerverse, is to become our own parents, to become our own best friend. Because as I've said before, this is really, truly the only relationship that will be till death do you part. Like that, this is for life, right? There's no divorcing or separating or anything from ourselves. If we try to, it's deeply painful, because I think a lot of the time our suffering comes from the disconnect from ourselves, from not loving ourselves, from not feeling our own, I know I've said this so many times before, but whatever we're yearning for to receive from the outside is what we're needing to give to ourselves on the inside. And so opening up to love, we would go, well, yeah, duh, of course I want love. But we have to acknowledge it's also really scary, right? It's really scary because if we open ourselves up to love, we also open ourselves up to pain, rejection, abandonment, ridicule, criticism, loss of trust, betrayal. Like so many things can happen, right? Because when we love, we're open. And the thing is it's also recognizing it's doing the work so that you can be open and find your strength. And that's the whole thing around reframing vulnerability, that you can actually be incredibly powerful in your vulnerability. That actually when we are we're kind of tightening ourselves up into the little acorn shell, and we're creating defenses and coping mechanisms and strategies to keep people at an arm's length, even if we want to call them in. But that isn't strength, right? And actually that kind of defensiveness or coping gets really exhausting. It gets really, really tiring, because at the end of the day, we want to just be who we are, for who we are, be accepted and loved for who we are, and get to just relax into that. And so that's the whole point of the inner work, is we've got to do that for ourselves. We have to feel that within ourselves first, because again, not that we can't be loved by someone else if we don't do that, but we just might not recognize it or allow ourselves to receive it. And I think this is like reading this book and remembering certain deeper aspects of every personality type, is we will all have a way of kind of going, I'm going to keep that a little bit at bay, right? So what would we need in order to open ourselves up to love and recognize that it's okay to be vulnerable? We have to first understand, what is it that brings us pain? What are we scared of? Where does our suffering lie? Like, to be able to just recognize what is our story and why do we keep love away. And that it might not even be conscious, right? This might be a part of your process where you're like, well, shit, yeah, do I do that? How do I do that? Because we all have, to varying degrees, some more than others, depending on the level of whatever maybe trauma you might have experienced earlier on. And of course, relationship patterns and things being kind of the pattern showing us again and again and us going, up, see, there's the belief. It's ultimately getting out of our story and really coming into this journey of coming into our true selves, which is we've got to heal the story first. I think there's no bypassing that. We don't want to get stuck in analyzing it and just replaying it over and over and over again. It's really coming into a state of love with and for ourselves to recognize that, oh, okay, I am scared of truly opening myself up to love because of ... You fill in the blank. So it's a really honest process of self-inquiry. And what's fascinating is that we can have so many ways of tricking ourselves, being like, oh yeah, I'm being really honest with myself. I'm being really vulnerable. And then you'll go through another layer and you're like, oh, damn it. Actually, no, I wasn't at the root of it. There's another layer of it, and it is the peeling back of the onion. So I want you to really sit with that. What keeps you from opening up to love? What are you afraid of? Even if you were to take a moment right now and just, or if you can't do it right now, at a later point, come back to this and just close your eyes and feel into it. Feel into the yearning for love. That, oh, I really want this. Or, if you're not in a relationship, or even if you are in a relationship, but you're not really feeling in tune with each other, go into the yearning for love. And underneath that, you can go into, what am I afraid of? That yearning for love, what is the fear underneath it? And so you sit with the fear and you get to know the fear and you be curious about the fear and you give it a voice and you allow it to speak. And then underneath the fear, it's like, well, where's the hurt? What's the pain that is driving the fear? And so you drop into the pain. You drop into the suffering. And you have a conversation with that part of yourself as well, that you go, when did you first get hurt? Where is this pain coming from? What did you learn that gave you this feeling of pain? And then, the coping mechanisms that come out of that. And essentially you drop down into the wound. And in the wound, as I've shared before, is where the unmet need is. And that's where we come in as our present day selves and really ask this part of ourselves, the inner child, what do you need? And ultimately, it's most of the time, 99.9999999% of the time, it's a hug. Because that's love. And that's returning to love from an internal place, not the external love that we're seeking, that we wished our parents could have given us, or our partners, or our friends, or society, or however we look for validation. That we're really embodying this love from the inside out. And it's this kind of, I went through that very quickly because obviously I can't go into the whole process right now, but the irony is that the very thing that we want, which is love, and the very thing that keeps us from love, which is normally pain, that pain needs love. And when the pain gets love, it will become open to love. Does that make sense? So that's why, how many songs have been written, all you need is love, right? It really, really, truly is true. And I think this idea of I can be open up to love when I've got my shit together, when I've sorted everything out. And, we talk a lot about self-worth and being good enough and being lovable enough and significant enough and competent enough, something enough. And actually all that is, when we think, well, how do you do that? How do you get there? All this self-developmental work. And, there's loads of things that can help you. right? And self-reflection and having guidance from someone outside of you is so, so hugely valuable and helpful. But really, what is it? Like, if I were to boil it down to one thing, is how do you love every little nook and cranny of yourself? Even the parts that you believe are just not worthy of it. Even if you think, no, I'm not worthy of this love. Like, something's wrong with me. I don't get that. Other people get that. They deserve it. I don't. Like, no, whatever the story is, or no, I don't trust love. People aren't to be trusted. Or I can't look at the pain because it's too painful, it's too scary. No, like what can of worms is going to open up with like monster heads coming out that are going to eat me alive. And so whatever the fear is, or there could be anger, or there could be shame, or there could be insecurity, or there could be doubt, or whatever it is, the first point is like, love that. Okay, if you can't love that, can you have compassion? Maybe compassion is the way that we soften into something. I remember when I was in my 20s and I was doing a week-long silent meditation retreat. And this was in a time where I was very, very energetically sensitive. And I would, even just walking down the street, would be able to feel other people's energy. And I would have to cross the street sometimes, or if I was on the bus, I'd have to get off the bus. And I was working with this shamanic woman who, even though in many ways was really incredible, her tactic was very kind of defensive. You shield yourself. You put blockers around you. You shield yourself. And I was finding that really exhausting. Everywhere I went, it was kind of like, oh, okay, I've got to put up the shield. I've got to put up the armor. I've got to put up something to kind of keep their energy out. Like, keep it out. Don't let it come in. But it was really tiring. And so I was talking to one of the teachers and just saying, this is what I'm doing, but I'm finding it actually really exhausting and kind of really sad. And he said, well, what if instead of creating a defense and an armor, what if you just put out compassion? And it was such a pivotal moment for me, because often when we're protecting ourselves, we think to defend, to put up barriers, to block. And we don't realize that that's really, really tiring, because you're having to hold something up. And so the last thing that we think of is giving something, because it's like we're trying to pull back into ourselves, and it's like, nope, I don't want this. This is the misconception of boundaries. It's like, I'm putting up a boundary and you are not allowed. No, it's this real kind of, it can be an act of defense, or it can be very hard. But the thing is, I realized that the giving wasn't to be overly empathic and take on their stuff. Right? As an empath, I really had to learn how to not absorb people's energy. I can recognize it. I can even empathize with it, but I don't have to take it on myself. But the act of giving compassion, what that did for me is it didn't take me into their space. It also didn't allow them to come into my space, but it created this really beautiful, expansive, bubble of light around me, bubble of light and love that felt like, this is my space. I love Buckminster Fuller's, what he says is boundaries are what you draw a circle around yourself, and you say that anything inside of, around yourself or whatever it is, and anything inside of that circle is sacred. And you get to choose what comes in and what comes out. But you honor what is in that circle. And that's boundaries. Boundaries are an act of self-love and self-care. So they're not defensive. They're not the shield. They're not the armor. They're the compassion for ourselves to say, this is what I allow in, and this is where I allow myself to expand out and connect to others. And this is the way that I want to do it that feels loving towards myself and others. And so feeling myself going into a space of compassion and that metta that comes from the heart, loving kindness that comes from the heart, and you extend it outwards, it made me feel like I was really in my expansive being. And it made me feel big, and it made me feel really safe, but not in an armored, protective way, but in a very expansive, centered, grounded way, and still loving. I didn't have to be defensive and closed down and be in my little acorn shell. I could be really loving, but not take on other people's stuff. And I think this is kind of maybe, I guess I'm sharing this story because it's like that. What if we took that approach to love? That when we get scared, that it doesn't mean we have to shut down, but it means, how do I take care of myself so that I feel safe within my own vulnerability so that I can rest in an open heart? And an open heart doesn't mean that you get trampled on. Like, that's having no boundaries, right? Which means we're not actually taking care of ourselves. We're not practicing self-care and self-love in those moments. So do you see what I mean? It's like this beautiful middle way that isn't coming into your shell, but it's also not like creating a defense mechanism and pushing people away, but being in this beautiful, open, expansive state that is very self-caring and self-nurturing, that knows, like, yeah, if I have to say no to something, I can say no, but it doesn't have to be defensive. And I think we do this inside of ourselves. So when we want to open up to love, but we allow our defenses to come in and be like, nope, that's too scary. That's too vulnerable. That's too painful. You're going to get hurt. You're going to get rejected. You're going to get abandoned. And we go into that story and then we keep ourselves from love. We don't open ourselves up to love because we're not opening up to love within our own being. And sometimes even just having the conversation, like I have found myself, I can be a very open-hearted person when I'm in relationship. But I can also recognize the moments when I'm trying to think of an example, but I just noticed the times where, like, if I get hurt, where I can create a bit of a defense around it. And so then if I have a moment where I feel like my heart opening again and I feel that love and that openness and that compassion and my compassionate being coming out, the part that hurts will go, nope, remember, you were hurt by this person. Like, don't be too loving to them. And what I realized actually is that you can acknowledge love and you can acknowledge hurt. I talk a lot about this with clients, that you can feel two seemingly contradicting feelings or experiences simultaneously. And I think it's actually really important to go into those spaces because it's very true that we can hold all of these different parts of us. Sometimes they're contradicting, and the experiences and the emotions of those parts of us. So can I be in an open-hearted place where I can really feel love and I can really feel the vulnerability of that? And then if pain or hurt comes in, or a story or a memory or an experience comes in, that I can hold both at the same time. That I can go, yeah, that hurt. Or if you're with someone that hurt you, or you're talking to someone that, like, you can say, that hurt me and I love you. This is such an important thing when you're doing work around your parents. Because I've seen this many times that you'll be talking about stuff in your childhood and you'll be really upset about something, but then the loyalty comes in. Oh, but they're my parent and I love them and this and that and the other. And so they feel bad about being angry or upset about something in their childhood. And I always say, you can feel both. Of course you're going to love your parents. Like, they're your parents. They gave you life, and no matter how good or bad your childhood was, there will always be a certain kind of loyalty or connection to them. And so it's absolutely okay to love them, but don't disown your hurt or your pain or your suffering. Because really, at the end of the day, it's not even about blame. It's not about saying they hurt me, they did this, right? Or if you go into the anger, it doesn't take away your love. It doesn't detract your love. So there's the holding both. But at the end of the day, it's really coming back. It's all an invitation to come back into yourself. So you don't want to get stuck in the story of blaming them, right? And then feeling guilty or shameful about blaming them and feeling like, oh, I should love them and I'm being a really bad, naughty child right now, daughter or son. Because really all of it is an invitation to go into, okay, these are the parts of me that are hurting. Yes, okay, I was angry at my parent for this. And I can see how they were just human themselves and going through their own struggle and suffering and maybe not conscious of it and not communicating or handling it in a conscious way. And so, I suffered at the hand of that. But then the invitation is to come in and really be loving towards ourselves. As we wish that they could have, but we come into a place of, can I open up to love within myself when I'm feeling pain? when I'm suffering, when I feel scared. Those are the moments. Self-love doesn't come in when you're all perfect and polished and that shiny, like beautiful little acorn. Self-love comes in when you feel like shit. That's the most important time for self-love to come in, because self-love comes in and says it's okay. What you're feeling is okay. What you're thinking is okay. It's all okay. Like, come sit in the lap of love and we can do anything from this point. I talk about it so much. I really know that I do, but it just is about coming back to that again and again and again, because just like our personality, we've picked up these habits and patterns and behaviors, and we over-identify with ourselves with it. When you start to have that space where you can be aware of those things and understand why they're there and have compassion for why they're there. But the process of alchemy and really stepping into your true self and coming home to yourself, as I like to say, I guide people home to themselves, back home to themselves, to their true self. You have to hold love. You have to take love by the hand, and you're going to have to take fear by the hand as well. Like you get to hold both of their hands and walk this journey back to yourself. So I'll leave you with coming back to the question of, what if I would open up to love? What about my fear and my pain and my suffering do I have to see? Do I have to sit with? And do I have to pour love into in order to just give myself the permission to open up to love and receive the love that I truly desire? And you know what? It's okay to say, I'm fucking scared. I really want love in my life, but I'm bloody scared of it. And that can be people that are single, and it can actually also really be people that are in a partnership or a long-term marriage and feeling like it's all a little bit just dull and boring and numb and unsatisfying. It's like, how do you open yourself up and become alive again to yourself? It's really easy to become complacent or ambivalent or apathetic when we've let kind of our behaviors rule the roost. And it's all stepping into awareness. Remember where A begins, the alphabet begins. Super corny, I know. Yeah, it starts with self-awareness, and then you bring love into everything. So I hope that that's helpful. As always, take it or leave it as feels right for you. If you're needing the personal guidance, you know where to find me. And loving you all from afar. You've been listening to Raw Conversations with Corinne Bloom. Thanks so much for showing up, listening in, and being a part of the conversation with me.